Hey everyone, welcome to the 5th edition of the Formula E Addicts podcast. I'm Edward Hunter, I'm with Jack Giordmaina, Jack Pickering, and our very special guest, Team Aguri principal, Mark Preston. So introduce yourselves guys, starting with Jack.
Hello, as most of you know me, I'm from the Formula E website, Formula E Zone. So yeah, I don't need any much further introduction. You guys know me pretty well by now.
Picko.
Yeah, hi, I'm back. Yeah, that's it.
And I'm Ed, I'm the head admin of the Formula E Addicts Facebook page and Twitter page. I just turned 20 the other day, which was a big milestone in my life.
Joining the 20 club like me.
We will have applause in the background and everything at this bit.
Yeah, there's still a lot of cake downstairs that needs eating up, so that's ongoing business. But I don't want to focus too much on me because obviously we got our very special guest, as I mentioned, Team Aguri principal Mark. So
hi there, how are you?
Good, thanks.
Good to be on here with you guys.
Yeah, we're very, very lucky to have you on, and it was really nice of Keith Smout, the commercial director, to organise this for us. And I know you're obviously very busy, with a lot of things that need to be sorted out before Beijing. So
we're lucky we're working on a Sunday afternoon, so we're all in the office at the moment.
It must be a really nice family atmosphere at Team Aguri, because obviously it's there's no real big manufacturer involved, but it's the same group of people that's been there ever since the F1 days, isn't it? Back
It is
in
indeed.
2006.
Yes, indeed. It's taken us a while to get back into racing as, well, Super Aguri or Team Aguri now. But, there's a lot of the same people involved.
So what I find quite interesting is that in F1, you were the technical director for Super Aguri, and now, obviously, Mr. Aguri was the team principal. And now it seems that you're the team principal, and Mr. Aguri is basically just the owner. He's got the name on the door. So how exactly did that come about?
Well, I think when we finished up with Formula One, obviously a lot of the car companies pulled out of Formula One, as you know, and many of the Japanese businesses, such as Bridgestone, also pulled back when there was the crash. So I'd been looking at other ways of getting back into motor racing or international motor racing. Aguri still runs his Super GT team in Japan and has done for 20 or so years, where he runs some of the Honda NSXs in that series. We were looking at what would be the next thing, and I went off around the world and had a look at things like Silicon Valley, and went to Detroit and a few places to see what we thought was going to be the future of kind of our favorite industry, and came across Formula E a few years ago when the FIA was first put out to tender for electric race cars. I pitched to manufacture all the cars, but at the same time, I think Alejandro was pitching to do the entire series, so everything from supplying the cars to promoting it. And when he, let's say, popped up on the scene, we rang him up and said, could we be involved? And he said, bring Aguri and we'll see what we can do. So I wanted to be team principal at that point, and Peter McCool was the technical director in the first year. And we've kind of all moved up one level, so it's sort of my chance to run the team.
And a very good job you do of it as well. In fact, you've already had some early success in Formula E, winning at Buenos Aires with Antonio Felix da Costa last season. So tell us a little bit about that and sort of the first season in general, maybe. The first
season we're a little bit late to start, and we didn't sort of build.
You wouldn't be the only ones, though, Mark.
Well, we didn't build off an existing team, which some of the guys could. For example, Andretti's or Edam's, who were building off the back of their other programs in GP2 and other series. So we kind of started from scratch. That took us a little while to get it all going, but we didn't have as good testing as we would have liked because of that in the pre-season, and so in the first few races we struggled a bit. But then in Punta del Este, which was before the Christmas break, we had a first test. Well, not our first test, but certainly the first test that really Antonio and Salvador had done properly and really found a lot of time in the car.
Of course, Salvador had only just joined the team then as well.
Exactly. So he had his sort of first day in some ways to really fully run a test. And then in the next race, basically, it paid off. We were able to take all of the ideas from the test, which was the day after Punta del Este, and put that all together. I remember Antonio in the sort of the in the practice sessions in the morning saying to me, look, if we can get in the top 7, we can win the race from there. We turned out to be top 8, and he went into the race pretty confident that there was so much carnage and craziness in this series, as you know, that he was pretty confident of being on the podium, and lo and behold, he was. That was good fun. Very good fun.
Best race of the year, in my opinion, and I'm not being biased at all, but I do think that Buenos Aires, in my eyes, was probably the best race of the year. It just had everything.
It's a good track too, actually. I think the drivers really enjoyed that track, more of a racetrack than some of the others. So, but I think also that when everyone first arrived in Beijing, if you have a look back now at some of the driver changes and you sort of watch the video as the drivers get out of the car and into the next car, and then you have a look at, let's say, how Antonio switched cars in the last race he was in, it's a world away.
Moscow.
Yes. So everyone, they sort of dance now as they jump out of the car and into the other car, whereas in the first one you can sort of see Takuma kind of getting out and not wandering over, but not going super fast between the two cars, and where it's a really big difference between the first race. So I think even Beijing this year will be different.
Well, it might have been a different time limit as well, because you remember we saw Edams get that horribly wrong in Moscow. They thought they had to wait longer.
That was rather funny. That was...
little.
We also made that same mistake in, we made it slightly differently in Long Beach as well. We were holding Antonio for 10 seconds extra because we'd got that number wrong from the pit entry to the exit. There's a chance that that'll change in the future, so it will be just down to how fast the drivers can switch between cars. I'm not exactly sure when we're introducing that.
Or it could be, I believe it's season 5 when they're talking about getting rid of the driver changes altogether.
I hope so. I mean, it's interesting when people say, how long will it be until you can do the race with one car? I think one of the big problems is that you probably could do it now if you had the infrastructure, which is that you could have inductive charging in the road if you really wanted to. And if you had four-wheel drive, full regeneration, you could probably get back a reasonable amount of the battery power already. It's just that that's a bit expensive for where we are in the development roadmap.
Yeah. I thought it was a cost issue because I read about a meeting quite recently that was about the development direction that Formula E was going in. I'm not sure if you're involved in that in any way or if anyone from Team Aguri was, but it seems that they, because I heard John Todd before then was going on about how he wanted to push that a bit earlier, and now it sort of seems to have been, okay, season 5 is okay then.
I think a lot could change. I mean, it's pretty amazing that we've actually got this series off the ground, and when you sort of think of what we've done, we've gone to completely different places when nobody had been to racing in places like Punta del Este, and we're in cities which make it sort of more difficult in some ways because you've got to negotiate with local councils. I understand that Miami, they had something like 160 permits they had to get from 7 different counties because that area of Miami crosses over a number of county borders, and therefore that sort of thing has never really had to be done in the past. So there's a lot of difficulties in setting up a season. I think once we get going again in season 2, you never know with motor racing. It could all accelerate at a great rate if one of the car companies decides that they've got the technology and would potentially like to share the batteries, for example, like Tesla does with their open source IP.
It's interesting. I have to get back to you a bit on Tesla because one of the questions that we got sent in by fans, and we got nearly a dozen or so questions, which was really good. One of them is about concerns Tesla. Before we move on to those, Jack, do you have any questions? Because I know that Picko and I have not let you get a word in edgeways so far. So,
well,
I barely said anything either.
Oh, sorry.
No, Jack, go on.
No, it's just I've only got a few questions really because me and Mark we've spoken testing. But we're going towards Beijing now. Like how are preparations? Because obviously going into Beijing last season, it was a sort of open. Okay, what could happen? You might have had an idea, but this year you've actually learned stuff from last year. So those things that you've learned, how are you putting it into your preparations? What did you learn, and how is that making the preparations better so you could be more competitive going into Beijing?
So we've been doing a lot of testing up at Donington, as you know. We've also got a simulator program now. there's a lot of changes coming up due to the change in peak power you're allowed to use in the race. So it's going to come down a lot more to the driver now. We have pretty much the same amount of laps and the same battery. So therefore, if you're allowed to use more power in the race, you're going to have to save more power as well. So the driver training really is one of the biggest things. I suppose, without being blasé about it, the normal, let's say, motor racing preparation goes on regardless. Everything from just understanding every little piece of the car. We've got a few new sensors on the car, and we're running some new software which we developed in the pre-season. Those things are all different. In the first year everything was fixed, but now we're able to work on our own software. So that's one of the big things. But yeah, the biggest thing that's different to any other racing series is really management of the power and teaching the driver better how they should use that power. So getting all that sort of stuff prepared is one of the biggest things.
So obviously with Amlin and Dre now, because you were the only team at the beginning to use last season's powertrain, now Amlin and Dre have reverted. In terms of, obviously at the beginning of the season you could be fairly competitive because we've seen the reliability issues tested. Obviously we've had a month where teams could try, but they haven't. Well, you can't touch the cars now. They can only learn from the data. They can't actually touch the car till we get to Beijing because they're all travelling as we speak. But do you feel like Amlin and Dre will now become your main challengers? Like, they're the team that you want to beat. And do you feel like maybe because we talked about the software optimization, and obviously Andretti haven't had as much time as you have, so is that the team that you feel like we need to beat them in a way?
Yeah, I mean, that's a natural competitor now. And then I think the two of our teams have to then go out and beat everybody else as well.
Yeah.
I think we proved that, as I said to you, we proved at McLaren back in 2003 that you can take a year-old car, do some work to it, and be very competitive. In that season, we came first, I think it was, in the first few races, actually, and building up a good points gap at the beginning while everybody else is trying to get their reliability is our number one target. So we have to sort of come out of the box better than anybody else with less problems and just focus on delivering at the first few races. There'll be a natural gap over Christmas, and I imagine we'll probably test in Punta del Este just like we did in the first year. So those first three races, we have to take as much advantage as we can. Software we can still continue working on, and I think everybody will be trying to figure out how to use these batteries to their maximum. There's a few little changes in the batteries, but the power usage may throw up some problems for everybody. And the batteries being the same size, even some of the new cars, they'll have to have quite a lot of efficiency gain to beat us, let's say. So qualifying is still 200 kilowatts, and it's a one-lap shootout, and therefore it'll really come down to how prepared the drivers are. As long as we don't make any mistakes for the team, the drivers have got to do one lap, get it right, and that's pretty hard. You'd have to go back and look at last year and figure out how many of the drivers actually got their fast time on their first lap or their second lap. I'd say everybody was second lap. So if you looked at the people's first laps out, you'd probably find a bit of knowledge on who's good at going out and setting a time. So that's a huge one, and that won't really come down definitely to the car itself, not always anyway, because the cars themselves are not going to be that much different in terms of mechanical setup, and aerodynamically they're pretty much exactly the same. So tyres are the same as well. So really it's going to come down to how well a driver can come out of the box and deliver in qualifying.
Speaking of drivers, it's very much the elephant in the room here, I think, because we've seen all the other teams have announced their drivers pretty early on, a lot of stable lineups. There's even the surprise of Jack Villeneuve being in there, but I've heard a lot of different rumours about who the two seats at Team Aguri have gone to. So
have you signed anyone? We don't need names. I just want to know whether you have or haven't.
We're finalising contracts today.
Oh, okay.
Interesting.
Well,
We'll
we'll
probably
really
have
await.
everything sorted out this week.
Do you think would there be an announcement later this week, or is it you're going to wait closer to Beijing? I know you have to announce 2 weeks before now.
Yeah, well, you got to remember we've got Fan Boost, haven't we? So Fan Boost opens, I think, in 2 weeks. 2 weeks before the start of the race,
and it continues 6 minutes into the race, not 6 days.
Yeah, it continues 6 days into the race. Isn't the
We're not that slow.
No, I can't do quick maths in my head. 146 hours of Beijing or something like that.
So I think by that point they'd be too tired and they sort of wake up in the middle and like, oh, I got Fan Boost. Oh, but I'm way too tired to drive right now.
So in time for Fan Boost anyway.
Yeah, be in time for Fan Boost. Splendid. Well, my final question for me before I hand over to the boys for their questions is obviously the FIA, they've said like there's going to be some track changes at basically virtually most of the events this season. So have you been told of what's changing at Beijing?
It's the first chicane, isn't it, Jack?
I believe so, but I just wanted a clarification.
There's been a CAD drawing arrived, but I haven't really looked at it carefully. The guys on the simulator have been working on it. I'm trying to think which corners were difficult last year. Was that the corner most people had trouble with?
Well, the last corner was very tight, so I was interested to see if the last corner had some sort of adjustment.
Well, we all remember what happened at the last corner, of course.
Yes.
And there was talk about the first corner chicane, or maybe some of the chicanes later on down the straight.
I think some of those chicanes will change slightly because, if I remember rightly, when people bounce over one curb, they were naturally forcing you into the barrier. I think there'll be some slight changes in the chicanes, I would say, to make it easier to go quicker through those and keep the excitement level and not have as many crashes, I would imagine.
Yeah.
So what I heard about from, I think it was an article on motorsport.com, was that the only real change at Beijing, at least, was that they were going to get rid of... It was either they were going to get rid of or bulldoze the first chicane. I was pretty sure they said...
I believe it's get rid of the first chicane, but I think...
That's interesting because that means it's going to be a much longer straight there.
Yeah, I think they should have got rid of the second chicane on the straight after because there's two chicanes on that little straight. There's the bus stop one which I would have kept, but there's one before that which I don't see the point of. So yeah, I would have got rid of that one instead. But I do not control tracks as much as I would love to. I don't control how the track layouts are and everything.
Well, you've been playing at it on Route Builder though. We all know.
Yep.
Yeah. So anyway, I think we'll go to a bit more of our questions a bit later on, just the other ones that are rolling around in our heads right now. But let's go on to our marked questions for Mark Preston, and I'll go head straight into the first one.
Yeah, that could be...
I know, sorry, I can hear people cringing in the background.
That was just I just cringed when you said that.
I know. I felt that I've been listening to a lot of other Formula E podcasts, and they have a lot of really cringeworthy titles for their segments. So I figured that that's a trend we have to adopt now in order to be popular. Anyway, so
can the title for this podcast be "Now with Experts"?
Title's going to end up being 4 people talk about things that aren't Formula E. Right. So first question is from Tim Salt, and it is: what is your opinion of the new rules that will be in effect for Season 2, and will the increased power to 170 kilowatts help you more than last season?
I mean, I think it's going to be more... The 170 kilowatts will just make it more difficult for the drivers. If you looked at PK, as we all did in London, he did a great job of managing energy. I think it's going to make it more difficult. So imagine that before you had 150 kilowatts peak and you still had to do things that we call it lift and coast. So at the end of the straights, you lift a bit earlier just before braking, and that's because that's where you save the most energy. Now you've got 170 kilowatts, but you've got the same battery power. That means you probably want to use more power out of the corner. So when you're going slower, but you're going to have to save more. So the 170 kilowatts is going to make it more difficult for the driver, although the lap times should be quicker. I'd say they'll probably be maybe half a second to a second quicker, but it depends on how much they have to save in each lap. So that part of it will be interesting. And then obviously the qualifying now is really down to the one lap, and of course people can make mistakes on that one lap, and it'll come down to who's one of the most competitive in terms of one lap, like the old days in F1 where most people went out in the last dying 2 minutes of the qualifying session. So it'll be a lot more like that. 5 cars, I think it is, isn't it, in
top
the
5.
Super Pole. So there's very limited time, and so qualifying will be very key. But then, as we found this year, there'll be a lot of changes in position as people make mistakes on the energy usage.
You mentioned Piquet Jr. there. One of the things that Admiral Nelson was... What? No, it's Nelson Piquet Jr. Sorry, that's just my nickname for him.
Oh dear.
One of the things that Nelson was really good at doing last year was staying out that extra lap. Do you think that's going to be more important, considering the fact that we've got the same batteries and we're using up... There's the 170 kilowatt limit that we've gone up to. Do you think it's going to be more important staying the extra lap, or do you think it'll not matter?
I mean, extra lap can be advantageous, depending on if you're being held up in a train. It's always better to go longer if you can. That always seems to be the number one. Gives you more options on the second car. So I think if you are stuck in a train, let's say, and you can't open up a big gap, then it is better to save as much as you can, go one lap, then you get an extra, then you've got more power in your second car effectively, and you can go faster because you've got a clean lap. That's the idea. So
but then things don't always go to plan if the stop doesn't go very quickly.
Yeah, exactly. So, but if it goes to plan, then theoretically that's still one of the quickest ways to do the race, unless you're at the front. Because if you're at the front, it's always best just to do the optimum, whatever that optimum is. But if you're stuck behind slower cars for some reason, they're not doing such a good job on energy usage, then you really want to save, let them go in, and then you take that extra lap, go as quickly as you can, and then the second car, you've got slightly better power. And you maybe jump a few people in the pit stops, and then you've got a bit more power to overtake.
So could you do the next question, please, Picko?
Yeah, okay. Freaky Dan Freakley has commented in to ask you, do you think mainstream F1 fans will start to head over to Formula E now that F1 has so many restrictions and Formula E is effectively improving on power and therefore fun?
His first name isn't actually Freaky. I just added that in for just because I thought it'd be funny.
I think
Sorry, Dan.
it's interesting. I think the races in the first year in Formula E were pretty exciting, especially London, the last race. I usually tell people
Monaco.
Yeah, I think I tell people to watch that last race because when people are out of position, it always makes it more fun. So the fact that the qualifying is going to be more difficult, less room for error, you will naturally get people out of place at each racetrack, and by doing that, mistakes always make for more exciting racing. So it depends on what people are looking for. If they're looking for technological development, then we haven't got certainly as much resource as F1 has, but we're always trying to work on changing things in Formula E. I think people will slowly get to feel that there is a lot of exciting things going on in Formula E, but it'll take a little while to get to that level of technological development that F1 has.
You said you didn't like the third question, Jack.
I was going to move on to the fourth question.
Oh, you can do the fourth one, because that's more interesting.
So the fourth one is sort of the Tesla question, and it's also with some other manufacturers. It says, do you think the likes of Tesla, Rimac, BMW, or Porsche, because they've all been in talks of maybe in the future turning up to Formula E, do you think they will come over to Formula E is the question, and how much crossover is there between Formula 1/WEC hybrid development and Formula E? And that comes from Tony Shorthouse.
Well, I can start with the sort of easier question about the Formula 1 WEC because Williams did the battery for Formula E in the first year, and it'll be the same, very similar battery in the second year with some upgrades. That is, I think the history of that battery was it did start with their Curse system in Formula 1, and they've developed that through the CX-75 with Jaguar and then into Formula E. So the effect on Formula E is reasonably big from Formula 1. It probably will become more so from WEC in the future, I would say, as people do more electrical power. I understand that maybe some of the manufacturers are going to redesign their cars soon because the Porsche was obviously pretty quick this year. Yeah. And I believe it has more electrical power than some of the others.
8 megajoules compared to the 4 of the others,
yeah.
And the Toyota.
So you've got to say that the others will go that way. They'll follow the what Porsche has done. I think the electrical power is more beneficial because of the torque control, basically. One of the big problems in an internal combustion engine is that is the control part of it. That's what's so good about electrical motors, is because of the control that it gives you. The internal combustion engine at the moment is more power just because the energy density of fuel is so much higher than batteries at the moment. I don't know whether batteries will ever get quite to the same level as fuel, but we may come up with other creative ways of not having to have so much energy on board. For example, induction charging in the roads. So, yes, there is a big effect from Formula One and WEC on the series. What about people like Tesla, and will it be relevant? I think, well, they've just announced their Model X, haven't they, this week? That was, and I haven't actually watched it yet, the announcement, but that's another. They're expecting to sell a lot more cars in that area. As time goes on and more manufacturers come into the series, we will make more gains in the technology. We're learning every day, I suppose. There's not many people. We've been talking to a lot of people around the world about how to understand the batteries better, and there's not a huge amount of knowledge in how to push a battery as far as we are in motor racing. And I mean, historically, motor racing has always pushed things well over the limit in comparison to road cars, just normal development. And naturally, you take more risk in racing, so that's one of the reasons why you make development. So theoretically, with the new Porsche Mission E, I thought that was quite a nice car at the Frankfurt Motor Show. I would have liked to have seen that in real life. That actually looks like it's a, let's say, the new target. You know, Tesla was the target everyone had. I think once that Porsche comes out, and that'll be one of the big targets. And I think Audi had an e-tron as well, didn't they? Yeah. So once those high-level cars come out, they'll be the new targets. And I could imagine that BMW will do some sort of upgrade soon. I imagine they'll be in something either in between the i3 and the i8, or maybe something above the i8. I'm not quite sure where they'll bring one out there, but I think they will all come because they'll all like to compete in motor racing to show their prowess, and there's a lot of development to happen in electrical vehicles, and motor racing will be one of those places.
What I found interesting was just the thing with Tesla, because Tesla have been, they've asked, because they've sort of been the pioneers. They've, electric motors for them has been their niche, and now it's, Formula E and other manufacturers are starting to get in. And I feel like Tesla, they say they don't want to come into Formula E, they don't want to compete, but then I feel like to myself, well, if you allow the other manufacturers to start competing and increasing their rate of development, that they could, overtake Tesla. I think Tesla are in a bit of like a 50-50, like, they can't get left behind, because it was Tesla for electric cars. If you fought electric cars, you fought Tesla. But soon you might, think Nissan, Porsche, and suddenly Tesla are about the back of your mind.
I think that Porsche changed the game, in my opinion. That was a pretty big step, because I didn't expect Porsche to come out with something so high-end and so all-encompassing, and I think it also looks like that Porsche is a design direction for the future for the Porsche company. So therefore, they kind of put everything into that one car. So if that car existed on the roads in the next year or so, which they could do fairly easily, then I can't see any reason why that wouldn't become the focus of everybody's minds. And, BMW could easily do something similar to that almost immediately, couldn't they? Because they already have the technology in the i3 and the i8, so there's nothing to stop BMW coming out with another car that copies that Porsche, or maybe they've already got it on the drawing board and we don't know about it. But I definitely think that could change the game very quickly, those two cars.
And it's also important to remember that Rimac, the Concept 1, is basically one of the course cars at the moment as well, isn't it?
It is indeed, yep.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that they'll compete with the big guys, and I think that's why the Porsches of the world really took the limelight.
And this before we move on to the next one, speaking of big car companies, there's a lot in the news recently about VW and the emissions scandal, and you had a lot to say about it yourself, and in this article I read, it was very interesting. You were talking about the demise of the diesel engine, basically, and how EVs were the future, and I thought that was a very bold claim, considering basically the diesel engine, we're so reliant on it, not just in the car industry, but also in the sort of agriculture, boats, all sorts of things. So could you elaborate a bit more?
I think that the future that we're talking about for electric cars is in megacities. So that's cities above 10 to 12 million people. That's London, Paris, Buenos Aires, those kind of cities.
All places that have Formula E races, of course.
Exactly. And so what we were talking about is where will be the first places that will be affected by this discussion on diesel. And I'm not sure if you know, but many of the big cities are talking already before this, before what happened with VW, about zero-emission city centres. So I think what I was really saying was that somewhere like London, and I mean, you look at LA back in, I think it was 10 or 15 years ago, when they talked about doing zero-emission, and that's why we had that GM EV1, I think it was called. That's why that got created back in that time, because Los Angeles, with its really big smog problem, was talking about going zero emission in the cities. Now, that didn't happen, but it shows that one of the biggest cities in the world was considering that 10 or 15 years ago. And it's very easy to see that, you know, a city like London is talking about it. I believe Paris has already been talking about it for a while now. The mayor there has been talking about zero emission, or at least very high restrictions on the city centres. So I think that the VW discussion will just have an accelerating effect in some of those discussions that are already happening. And you could imagine that if the government in one of those cities had already got it on the cards, then this might just accelerate or catalyse the change. And I've always said that when one mega city does it, then others will follow. So if someone in China, a city in China, says we're going to make zero emission in Beijing or another city, maybe only in the very, very center of the city to begin with, then it won't be long before somewhere in Germany will do it, somewhere in the UK will do it, somewhere in America will do it, and you'll start to be on a bit of a snowball. So for me, it's just really waiting for a catalyst, and that's why we were saying that maybe this whole discussion will just move forward a couple of cities, and then you'll be it'll be a snowball effect.
Okay, that's really interesting.
Mark, I'm not going to tell you who sent this. I just want
you'll be able to know pretty quick.
Yeah, yeah, because I want you to guess who this is written by. Okay, the question is, why don't you pay your commercial director more money? Who's that from, Mark?
Yeah, he's sitting across from me now, waving at me. I'm just going to.
Is he waving a check at you?
I'm just gonna
Sorry, I couldn't resist.
He's brought sweets to our meeting today, so he's all right.
Okay, that's another few months on his contract, surely.
Exactly.
There was one we skipped earlier, which was from Krysztof Aleksander Wozniak. I hope I pronounced that correctly.
Well done.
How do I get a job with a Formula E team, especially in media?
Where do we guess where he lives? I wonder. There's a lot of you got to be in some ways. You got to be where all the teams are, which is most of the teams are in the UK. Certainly the base up at Donington. In media, you can always send your CVs to everyone. Yeah, send your CV, and that always works because you never know what people are looking for, and get experience doing things like what you guys are doing, podcasts and interviewing people and running your own blog. It sounds like that's all the way to go nowadays. But
when
certainly,
I was up at when I was up at Donington for one of the test days, Jack Nicholls just sort of got a bit. He sounded like that he got bored after the first half an hour, so I did tweet him to say, do you need any help up in the commentary box? I'm very happy to help. He didn't respond, and so I asked him why in the lunch break, and he still didn't ask me to come up.
Maybe two Jacks would have just gotten too confusing. I mean, who would do that?
Yeah, too many Jacks in the box.
Yeah, and but Jack Nicholls, a very nice guy and commentator. The company that does all the broadcasts for me, Aurora Media Worldwide, Krysztof, if you're still looking for someone, those seem to be the people to ask for a media job, because they handle a lot of the Not so much the social media side, but in terms of the broadcast side, that would definitely. I've asked them for a job. Not got a response back yet, but hopefully,
Just got to
keep trying. Maybe
Exactly.
do more podcasts with famous people like Mark. So anyway, let's see. The next question is from one of our very dedicated users on the Facebook page, Matt Murphy, who's also been on the podcast in the third edition, I think. And he asks, how do you intend to market a Japanese racing brand to people in the UK?
Oh, that's a complicated question, isn't it? I think based off the history in F1 and racing, really. We're an international team. I'm Australian. Aguri's obviously Japanese. We have a very international group in our team, so I don't really want to focus on one country. I think our heritage is Japanese, obviously, because of Aguri, and this is the centre of motorsport in the UK. So it's traditionally a lot of Japanese companies have actually run out of the UK and do at the moment. For example, Honda does have its engine build shops in the UK, work very closely with McLaren, and many of the touring car teams and other things have run out of here as well. So really, motor racing is international, and we have got a history of having Japanese team members, but we've also got team members from other parts of the world. So we're an international racing team.
Currently for me, where I live in Oxford, I'm currently effectively right bang in the middle of Motorsport Valley. There's Formula One factories all over the place, and there's a few touring car teams everywhere. So yeah, the Oxfordshire area and around Silverstone, around that sort of area is probably like the best place to find any motorsports companies.
Exactly.
Speaking of Japan, what I wanted to know about was you and Sakon Yamamoto recently went to Tokyo, didn't you, for their little demo run? How was that like?
Did he crash?
No, he didn't.
He was going very slow, and he got a lot of tweets from his fans saying you're a bit slow, because basically the police over there it's banned to race on roads, and it was only able to happen because we ran in this area called Roppongi, which is one of the sort of city centre suburbs, and they got special permission from their prefecture, which is like their county, to run on the road. They're looking at changing. Well, they are trying to change the rule. I think it's actually in October to allow road racing in particular circumstances, a bit like Switzerland's been doing with their rules, to allow road racing. It was really well attended. You know, the Japanese are really big fans of motorsport.
And they're big fans of Formula E as well. There seems to be so much enthusiasm, especially, Sakon does a lot of his work for TV Ayashi as well.
Yes, indeed. And I did see a report in the last few days, and I was just going to try and bring it up if I can do really fast, as to how many people we actually had there or how much coverage it got. I think it was something like 15 or 20 million people watched the demo run in Japan. So it's really popular. But motorsport is absolutely popular in Japan, and we have a lot of fans there. So it was quite a good event, and it got a lot of coverage, and that'll help them to push quite hard to have a race in Tokyo in the future. I think that would be one of the most amazing races that could happen if they were able to get a race downtown Tokyo.
So, do you think the evolution of Formula E cars will be used in the evolution of electric cars in the future? And what are your predictions when it comes to numbers of viewers and fans, maybe compared to F1? Do you think it will still grow? And that comes from Maiken Birkelund.
I think so. Motor racing, there's something that NASA uses to describe the development of technology, and they call it technology readiness levels. And normally at the top of that of those levels is when you deliver something to a customer, and a lot of the experimentation is hidden behind in the R&D centres of car companies as they work on their new cars. One thing about motor racing is that it's a test track out in the front of people. I was talking to some people over the last few days about autonomous cars, and we were talking about whether or not we should run autonomous in racing, and I actually think we should maybe do it, for example, under the safety car, because one of the biggest problems about getting autonomous cars onto roads is, of course, people being worried about it. And what better way than to get people used to autonomy as to run things on racetracks where it's basically safe. You could run with a pit lane speed limiter kind of level of speed, because really you don't have to go fast under the safety car. It's really just to keep the car,
especially with the full course yellows that are coming out as well in the new rules.
Yeah, exactly. And you could have a follow me BMW. You've probably seen those videos where they have one car following another, and the front car is driven by a race car, and the car behind just follows the first car.
It's still a very unorthodox idea for a racing series, though, to implement that.
Well, I was thinking about this morning, what do you need? Well, you need electric power steering, which is pretty common in road cars nowadays. We've got plenty of electricity on board to do that. If you run it under pit lane speed limiter control, then you've got the car's speed controlled, and then really it's the software that controls the throttle and steering, and brakes. And the brakes can be done through regeneration. So you'd have to start slowly, in the first year that maybe it could only go around at 30 or 40 kilometers an hour just to make sure it worked properly. And then as time went on, you could imagine the cars under the safety car being controlled completely at a higher speed. So I see that motor racing should be the place where you should be experimenting with ideas that later go into road cars. It's not just the experimentation part of it, but it's also gaining acceptance of the consumers or customers as to those things working. So, when race cars put seatbelts in the cars, I think it's not just the fact that it made the car safer, it also made the person on the street say, "Oh, race cars have seatbelts, so I'll wear seatbelt." So there's certainly a lot to making adoption quicker. One of the questions we've been sitting here today asking is, who should the target audience be? And you know that Formula One's target audience, not target, but sorry, main demographic is getting older by the day. So I think Formula E really needs to be focused on the future. That's you guys, 20-year-olds.
Newly made 20-year-olds, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Because that theoretically, you're the people that will buy whatever the new cars are in the future, and you're the people that will be encouraging autonomy maybe to happen or not happen. So whatever we do in Formula E, I think we need to target a different audience in Formula One, and because we're racing in cities and because we're modern, I mean, one of the things I noticed at many of the races was that there was kids there.
A lot of families as well.
Yeah, I mean, if you go to a Formula One race, it's very noisy. Obviously, that's one of the sells.
Not as noisy as it used to be, obviously.
Yeah, but maybe noisy again next year, and that puts off, bringing 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds and things like that. Whereas Formula E, certainly in Battersea Park, had this in London. We had a lot of very young kids. Maybe a lot of them were playing on the bouncy castles, but they also were watching the cars and learning about electric vehicles. So I think it's up to us and yourselves to promote this in a different way, I think, than Formula One, and not just copy. So there's some exciting times ahead, and I think we have to find new ways. I mean, this fan booster will be interesting, won't it, to see how it goes in the race. If the commentators play that well, I think that'll be a really interesting race where we can vote for our own drivers. I'm not sure how we're going to do it in the pits. We'll have to figure that out, how we vote for our own drivers.
Turn on 4G.
Yes. Well, in some places, the problem at the racetrack is that you race in a place like Battersea Park, which is not used to having 40,000 people trying to make phone calls and download things on...
Or when it rains as well, on top of that.
Exactly. So we'll have to have our
wasn't that crazy?
We'll have to have our own secret link somehow.
Yeah. Alejandro Gag said he expected the energy in race cars' batteries to be doubled in 5 years' time. Is the battery development really so promising, or do you think we'll have to wait a bit more before watching a race without cars swapping? Which battery technology will reach a goal? Graphene, lithium ion, or other?
So I go a different way in this question.
And this is from Fulvio Berardi. Berardi.
I don't think we should be looking at it in that way. If you, and again, we haven't done these calculations properly yet, but some very quick calcs some of the guys have been doing is how much can you regenerate? So let's get very technical here for a second. If you get a car up to, say, 150 kilometers an hour or miles an hour, when you brake, theoretically, you're just pushing all of that energy into heat in the brakes, and that's why they glow. So all of that energy that you use to get it up to 150 miles an hour is now just gone out the door in heat. If you can regenerate all of that energy or a proportion of that energy back into the battery, then theoretically you should be able to use all that energy to go up the next straight. And all the battery has to do is to get the car going and then to replace the lost energy. So that's the theory. But getting that energy back into the battery is one of the most difficult things. And so as development goes on, while we're not able to regenerate the levels we'd like to, so you need to be able to regenerate from the front wheels as well as the rear wheels, and we can't do that at the moment. But if we were able to regenerate everything from the front wheels, a little bit like some of the WEC cars, which can do more regeneration than we can, then over time you won't need to double the battery. You may only have to go up by, say, 1.5. And then as time goes on, if you were to wirelessly charge the cars as they're moving, which has been some of the discussions, if you look on the internet, you'll see some ideas about making one lane.
It was Drayson, who used to work with Trulli, who originally suggested that.
Yeah, so you can see theoretically, if you wirelessly charge the cars, you don't have to double the battery. So what I'm trying to say is it depends on which direction we go in development. If we're able to do four-wheel drive, full regeneration, then maybe the current battery can do it by itself. Maybe it has to be a little bit bigger. Maybe it has to be 1.5, 1.25 times. So the great thing about motor racing is we're not constraining ourselves to say double the size of the battery. We're just saying we want to get rid of one of the cars. That's a different question. So going back to the question, which technology in batteries? Yeah, I think most people predict the batteries won't be changing at the rate we need in terms of just pure chemistry, but we shouldn't think about, that's what's great about motor racing. Don't constrain yourself by saying it has to come from graphene or other technological developments. It's going to come from completely different thinking, and that's what we should be doing in motor racing. Completely different thinking, and you never know, fuel cells might come in the future as well.
Do you think it's going to be Williams Advanced Engineering that are going to continue to supply the battery? Because we heard a few rumours about Rimac competing for it as well.
I'd say there'll be certainly the suppliers in the short term, and then hopefully one of the big battery suppliers, maybe the Panasonics or the Samsungs of the world,
Duracell,
exactly, decide to
or the Tesco value batteries.
Yes, those guys might come along. We don't know about Tesco's, but we'll go to Duracell if they come.
Right, so question from Ross Curtis. This one is, who do you feel the team will... Oh, we sort of discussed this, but who do you feel the team will be fighting over the course of the season, and where on the grid do you expect these fights to be? At the front or maybe slightly further back?
There was a lot of reliability concerns, as you know, at the testing, so it was quite difficult to see who had solved reliability and
on the outside, it seemed that
performance.
Team Aguri was the most reliable because they got the most laps in.
Yeah, I think we were certainly the most reliable. It's whether or not we felt how much quicker the other guys were. And again, testing is so difficult because, theoretically in testing you're allowed to run underweight. The testing is not a competitive event. So, you don't have the FIA weighing the cars, for example. So testing is always difficult to know exactly what levels people were running in power or what they were running, or the tyres, I suppose, but you don't know what setup the cars were. And that's why, in any racing series, it's always difficult to tell with pre-season testing. We don't think we're too far behind. We don't believe people have made huge gains. A lot of the gains have been let's say, hidden or confused by the fact that everybody's got more power. So, of course, we're 1.5 seconds quicker at 170 kilowatts, just like you would imagine. Because if you look at a typical race weekend from last year, you'll see that in sessions 1 and 2, you only run once or twice with full power before qualifying. And the difference with this series to any other series, it's quite dramatic. You watch the times, and then all of a sudden someone uses 200 kilowatts, and of course they go 3 seconds quicker, and you say, wow, that guy's quick. And then actually you say, no, that's the normal 3 seconds that they do go quicker when they had 50 kilowatts. So it'll be difficult to tell until really qualifying. And even then in qualifying, you won't be sure, because now we have this one lap. Many people could have made mistakes. So I think there will probably be 1 or 2 dominant teams, most likely the ones that are backed by a car company, because that's sort of what typically happens in terms of resources. So I expect that Renault will do a very good job, and as will DS and maybe ABT. And then some of the reliability concerns that some of the guys had, it's hard to tell whether they'll have their reliability fixed by the first race. They are allowed to bring new parts if they can get the homologation changed. That's part of the rules. So you'd hope in the first races maybe you won't be so quick in qualifying, but we can certainly make up positions in the race as we did last year. We did quite a few good drives. And then the energy management will one of the other key areas. So as we saw last year, there was a huge variance between how people saved and used energy, and that could still overshadow any gains that a team has made in performance. If it was F1 and it was all computer controlled, then maybe there would be a bigger difference in performance. But in this series, where the drivers, it is a lot down to the drivers how much energy they can save. It'll be more difficult for those drivers then. And the differences the driver makes could be enough to change the outcome for a team.
We said obviously, the reliability at the beginning of the season, and that could give you some big points. To know how it goes at the beginning of the season. But towards the end of the season, say latter half, when we get to Paris, Berlin, maybe when we go to round 5 in March, when teams start to get to grips with their new powertrain, do you think what can you do? I know you said with McLaren, you were competitive with McLaren in 2003, but but once they get their powertrain sorted out, and maybe you expect the manufacturer powertrain to for a second season upgraded version to eventually outperform the first year's powertrain. So what do you think you can try and do in the second year to try and keep second half of the season, to keep competitive, to try and keep scoring some points?
A lot of it will be down to, as I said, the drivers and learning the energy stuff. I mean, what's completely different to Formula One, for example, is the power isn't limited in Formula One, whereas it is in this series. So what we have is really a completely different conundrum, let's say. And because the power usage over a lap is fully controlled by the driver, again, we have something that's completely different to any other series. So you have these natural limits. You've got the peak power you're allowed to use. Maybe some of the guys can be more efficient, but the driver still has to manage that power over a lap. So we can still be very influential on training the driver over a lap and getting their competitiveness at the track sorted. Aerodynamically, everyone's the same. I always say that motor racing speed is about engine, aero, and tyres. Aero is the same, tyres the same. So we will look carefully at tyres, as we always have done in every other series we've raced in, and we'll look very carefully at aerodynamics. Power of the engine is limited, and power sets top speed. Top speed is proportional to power, and therefore, again, there'll be some efficiency differences. So you may find someone is slightly better in a top speed, but a lot of the parameters are controlled. Dampers are free, so we can do work on dampers. Wheels are free, out of interest, which you saw pre-season. Mahindra was playing with some different wheel offsets. So there's a lot of, and then software is free. So there's a lot of freedoms that we have that everybody else has. and batteries are the same, and the car's the same pretty much everywhere else. So this is a slightly different series than many others because of those parameters, and for me it'll really just come down to total resources. Who's got the more total resources to do more things? There's always something you can think of to optimize. So a lot of it will come down to the total resources that a team has.
Our very own Joe Jones has sent in and said, how are you approaching funding a manufacturer? Do you really have the money to keep up against the likes of Citroen? And do they have exciting... I'll start that again.
Yeah, he's put about 4 questions together here, sorry.
And do they have any exciting new sponsors coming on board? I also want a driver's announcement.
It's always difficult to compete with a car company, but as you can imagine, we're also looking to get partnerships with OEMs. That's one of my key goals, is to look at a partnership with OEMs.
You got very close as well, didn't you, before this season, to being the 9th manufacturer?
Yeah, I mean, the manufacturing-wise, that's a little bit different to what that question is, because the only real OEMs are Citroen and Renault. It depends on how you see the ABT relationship. I don't quite understand that one. And then, of course, you have Mahindra. But that's what I consider the real OEMs. The ones with more resources, not just money, but resources through their R&D centres. Citroen obviously has a great deal of experience in racing in WRC, and of course we all know Renault has lots of experience in racing, from everything from 2-litre Renault to obviously Formula One. So it's not just about money, it's also knowledge. And we're also obviously trying to work on partnerships with OEMs and other big technology partners. And that's the name of the game. We'll all keep working on that, and we'll all keep working on trying to find partners that match with us. So yeah, that's pretty much my job at the moment.
And as for drivers, of course, by the time this podcast goes out, everyone will probably know who the drivers are.
Yeah.
But,
so can you tell us? Jack, reporting.
All we can make right now are a couple of educated guesses.
Ready for fan boost, as we said.
Just a question, because I heard about Antonio Felix da Costa, who was one of your drivers last year. He said that DTM was his main priority, but then when the dates changed, he said he came back and said, "Oh no, I want to race him. I want to race him for Formula E now." And so have you been in talks with him or not?
I don't think he could comment, Jack.
Yeah, better not comment on anything. Yeah. Just in case.
All I would say is that I don't think those are conflicting statements, Picko, because I think even if he would come back with Formula E, and this is entirely speculation, I think his priority would still be in the DTM, and if there were any clashes, he would have to miss the races, and a substitute driver would have to be used. And of course, bearing in mind the new rules about driver changes, which means you can only use two driver changes per car per season, I think. So that means you have a maximum of 3 drivers in each car, I believe. Yep. Any thoughts on that?
That's true.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Nailed it. On there.
Great thoughts.
Yeah, I think people got very fed up with the driver changes last season, and a lot of them were circumstantial, like, the driver would get caught taking drugs or something, and or they or they would they had other commitments elsewhere, and they just couldn't commit to the full season. They wanted a more regular driver. All sorts of, mainly just kind of circumstantial. I don't think anyone really tested this for the sake of it, putting like 6 drivers in the car over a season.
No, indeed.
Yeah, so anyway, that's the end of our questions now. So I guess we move on to our last segment, which is Beijing and what we can expect there, and then we have to say goodbye. So does anyone have any big predictions they think is going to they really want to see or they really think they might see in Beijing? I'd like to see Trilly do a few more laps.
Once they got their engine working, I think they did do a few laps on the final 2 days. But what I think one of the big shocks of testing that we saw was Next EV because they are the champions, not constructors wise, but drivers wise. They've got the drivers champion, but they never got the ball rolling for quite a while. They only really got it rolling last couple days, and they still weren't that quick. So,
well, I mind they've done a lot of private testing as well, and that went much smoother for them prior to Donington.
Yeah, and so but I wouldn't put Next EV in the frame. I'd say Apt and Edams. I'd shove Aguri up in there as well as maybe Andretti.
Well, you have to.
You have to. I was going to say you can't just not
exactly.
say Aguri.
And maybe Virgin as well, and maybe all the teams. To be honest, I genuinely have no idea.
Yeah, it's amazing that it still feels really open even after one season and all the developments that have happened since.
I think Mark might agree with me. In those last 2 days where we had the rain towards the end of the session where the track could have been at its best, really didn't help anyone sort of find out who could be quick, or no one really went for a proper 200 kilometer. Well, people did, but in terms of full let's go for an actual qualifying simulation lap,
I wish it.
We also had limited tyres too, so
yeah.
I wish it rained on the day that I went there. It was just too hot that day. It was something. It was in the 20s and it was horrible. That just proves how British I am.
You were in London when it rained, though, weren't you, Picko?
Yes, but the thing is, down at turn 13, it's been raining since the start of qualifying.
Yeah.
But where I was at the first at the chicanes. It started raining after sorry about this, Marco, but after it started to rain properly there after Sakon's crash.
It did indeed.
Yeah. That's why I don't know we're talking about London, but it was kind of like I don't want to digress too much. It was kind of like Spa. I had that real feel. It's like it's raining at one part of the circuit. The final sector was so wet, and the first sector was so dry. I was like, this park is so small. How is this happening?
Wondering about it feels a bit labyrinthian at times, but I want to talk a little bit. I do have one question about Battersea that I'd like to put to Mark, but before I just want to make my quick predictions for Beijing. I think that
is the question: are we going back there?
Yeah, kind of. It was more kind of should we go back there, sort of, which I talked a lot about in the last podcast. But Beijing quickly. Edams are going to be quick. Abt Schaeffler Audi will definitely be quick as well. DS Virgin, a few question marks. They say they could be as quick as Edams, but I think they'll definitely be up there. But whether they'll be in front, it could depend on whether Sam Bird or Jonathan Verne can get a really good lap in qualifying.
Yeah.
And as for Team Aguri, personally, I see them just behind that group, perhaps sort of with the fifth or sixth quickest car. I think in terms of, I'm just being honest.
That's still rather good.
I don't think that will stop them. I think they could still be in contention to win races, though. I
think anyone can be in contention to win races, as was proved last year. And yes, we have this new development, but it's still so close, as we saw from testing. Times between the Mahindras, Venturis, Dragons were separated by only thousandths of a second. So it's going to be super interesting as well.
It is indeed.
So my other question about Battersea itself, and don't get me wrong, I really liked going there. I really loved the race itself, but in the last podcast we talked to Paul, who is a resident at Battersea, and he was he had some very strong views, and a lot of them were backed up by his own experience, I guess, and also what he knew about what he'd been looking into about the organisation of the race and the build day. But I feel a little bit like worried about the opposition that's there, and I feel like maybe we should be at least considering some of the other venues in London, like XL, for example, put forward a venue there was kind of a weird indoor-outdoor circuit. I haven't seen any track maps of it. But...
I didn't even know that I didn't know that it went indoor. I had no idea how they were going to make the track there. But I'd love to see if anyone has a copy of this so-called XL track down there.
Yeah, I really need to contact them about that.
I can't make tracks in Excel. I usually go for Photoshop.
I don't know what they were going to do, if they were going to rent out an exhibition hall or whatever, but I definitely feel that there are a lot of questions that need to be answered in terms of these alternative London venues. And definitely...
My track in the Queen Olympic Park.
Yeah, okay.
Just put it out.
That is one of the...
but my worry really is that in creating this opposition, which, intentionally, or I'm pretty sure it's not intentional, it's just these residents have been rubbed up the wrong way. I'm worried that we're sort of going down a route that we don't really want to, and that we could be sort of... What I really don't want is in 5 or 6 years' time, we look back and say, "Oh, we turned these protesters against us in London, and that was what killed the championship." I really don't want that, to have that sort of sad story playing out. So I'm not sure if you have any sort of thoughts on that, Mark. But
I think as long as Alejandro does his job, that's his job to figure out how to fix all the problems.
Obviously, it's nothing to do with you, because obviously you turn up and race. I mean, it's not really your responsibility at all. But
I think he'll do a good job. He always does.
Yeah, he's a good guy.
The residents need to be convinced of that.
Yeah,
is the only thing.
Well,
it'll be all right, I'm sure.
Well,
okay.
We should find out in November. Finally,
yeah, definitely.
Something should happen. November 24th. I'll be there.
Right. So anyway, I guess that's everything. So I have to say,
Jack will be doing autographs there. Now he's advertised that he's there. He's just going to be there with a pen, just like waiting to sign everyone's.
I may be going to. So I have to say a really big thanks to Mark for coming along. I really liked having you along, and for the ride. Short note, and thanks for taking up your time. Thanks, Keith, for organising, and to Team Aguri. Wish you all the best of luck for this season, and we really hope good luck to your drivers, whoever they may be.
Yes,
and really think we want a really good season. We'll be covering it and supporting you and the other teams, because we have to be at least partial,
semi-biased.
But yeah, thanks as well to you, Picko, and to you, Jack, for coming on as well. And thanks to Dad for getting me this new microphone. I guess all that remains is when should we do the next one?
In a couple of weeks' time, I guess.
Yeah, after Beijing.
Beijing review, Putra Drive preview rolled into one. I think that would be a good one.
If we can fit it in.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's really exciting times. Really hope to, whoever you are watching right now, that you really enjoy what you see in Beijing. Mark will be in charge of this, so if his cars do something you don't like, or they do something that they do like, go tell him on his Twitter account, which is
Mark Preston 3.
Yeah, it's sorry, that was the worst lead-in ever. My Twitter account is...
I'm just going to turn my mic off now.
My Twitter account is @EdwardJHunter. Jack's is @JackJordanMana, and Picko's is Picko F1, is it?
Yeah,
Picko Motorsport.
Yeah, @Picko Motorsport. Of course, there's the FE Addicts account @FE Addicts, and the Formula Addicts Facebook page, where we do all sorts of things, including like the questions for this, which we did there.
You forgot Formula E Zone.
Oh yeah, Formula E Zone too.
Just putting that out there so that
Jack
doesn't forget.
Thank you, Picko. I wasn't really that bothered,
okay.
But yeah, cheers.
Anyway, so that's it for now. We wait to see what happens in Beijing. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.